I'm going to be talking to veteran energy journalist Shawn McCarthy about some comments that were made yesterday by conservative leader Erin O'Toole about remarks that Stephen Guilbeault made in an interview, a media interview. And O'Toole is misrepresenting what Guilbeault said, but in such a way, I think that Shawn, amongst others, came right flat out and called it a lie. And this is unusual in national journalism circles. So we're going to discuss that. Welcome to the interview, Shawn.
Thanks very much, Markham.
Now, just for our viewers who aren't familiar with this, I'll just set the scene very quickly. Minister Guilbeault was being interviewed by the Narwhal, and he said that there has been a commitment by the government by 2023 to end fossil fuel subsidies, so subsidies for coal, oil, and gas. And he said maybe 2023, but he said 18 months. That's basically what we have. And then Erin O'Toole tweeted out a video, and in it, the tweet, he said very clearly that Stephen Guilbeault, in fact, I'll quote it, Stephen Guilbeault wants to phase out Canadian energy in the next 18 months. Right. How disconnected can Justin Trudeau's activist minister be? You called that a lie. Why did you do so?
I called it a flat out lie. And it's not something I do lightly, because I think we have to be very careful when we talk about lie. There's a lot of misrepresentation in politics of the other side's platforms or what have you. But in this case, you know, it was just so blatant. And correcting you on a little point, when Guilbeault and Guilbeault misspoke. I think he was trying to say we will be phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, but he said we will be phasing out fossil fuels. So, but even that, if you start a process of phasing something out, it doesn't mean you're going to be finished in 18 months. He never said we will phase out fossil fuels in 18 months. And the Conservatives, whoever, I assume some aide put these words into O'Toole's mouth, but you know, it was clearly and intentionally a misrepresentation of what Guilbeault said. And my friend Adam Radwanski called it an absurd misrepresentation, and I thought that was a bit generous. I think sometimes you just have to call it what it is. When somebody intentionally falsifies what somebody else has said, they're lying.
Well, you and I had an interview a year ago where we discussed this very issue, and you argued quite rightly. I mean, the traditional journalism view of this issue is that journalists most times cannot know the intent, the heart of the person who supposedly is making the lie. And then it's much more accurate to say that the person made a false claim or a misstatement, something like that. And less, but this one, and I have to say that you have, that conversation influenced the way I look at this issue. And I've kind of, was a little more cautious after that, I think. But is this a one-off, or are we maybe entering a new era where journalists are going to have to look at these comments and just say, okay, look, that's a fib, that's a lie?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's a one-off. I hope they just went over the line. I mean, the fact that Guilbeault gave them some room by misstating, and I'm sure he meant to say fossil fuel subsidies, but he didn't. And that's the explanation that I heard from their supporters, was that he essentially said that he didn't phase out within 18 months. But I think we have to be judicious. I think we have to look at where there's a clear intention to falsify the record, and that's a lie. Where there is room for interpretation, I think we have to back off, and where we can't judge somebody's intention, I think we have to back off. But I felt it was pretty clear they knew that was not what Guilbeault had said, because it was, I mean, you read it, and he certainly, and the language that O'Toole, there were two different, there was, what he said was end the use of Canadian energy, which is really ridiculous, and then the text in the tweet said, and I believe, or the other way around, said, end the use of fossil fuels, phase out fossil fuels within 18 months. And we have phase out of coal fired, the policy was put in place years ago. We're still in some provinces using coal, but that phase out is continuing. And that if we were assuming he was talking about a phase out of the actual use of fossil fuels as opposed to the subsidy, then you would have read it as, we're going to put this policy in place, because that's what he was talking about, right? He was talking about putting the framework, putting the policies in place, methane reduction. He wasn't going to have methane reduced by 70% within 2 years. He was going to have the policy in place within 2 years to achieve that. Ending fossil fuel use in the power sector. He was going to have the policy in place to achieve that, not that it was going to be complete. And I felt that was clear, and I think so did a lot of people. I had more hits on that than I have on many things on Twitter, probably all Liberal supporters, but there you go.
Well, I read the Narwhal article, and it was pretty clear to me. And in fact, I don't know if this was added afterwards, but they did put subsidies in brackets, which journalists will commonly do. If they're adding something that was, to clarify or
it was a misspeak. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't know if, that was there from the beginning, or that was added after. Nevertheless, I want to make the point here, Shawn, that the argument or the accusation, the allegation that OToole made, this is not the first time. I mean, the industry and oil and gas industry, and Jason Kenney, for instance, in Alberta, and Scott Moe in Saskatchewan, have been making the argument for the last 18 months or 24 months that the federal government's proposed just transition strategy is actually, and I quote, about dismantling Alberta's oil and gas industry, or Canadian oil and gas industry. And really, this is just, to my mind, a wrinkle on that particular narrative. And I'm not, frankly, I wasn't surprised to see OToole say it.
Yeah, I agree. The difference is, I think over time you could argue that the Liberal policy is to eliminate the use of fossil fuels, and the Alberta energy sector is going to be, unless they can produce non-emitting fossil fuels somehow, the Alberta energy, oil and gas sector is going to be hugely, essentially put out of business. But that's over a long period of time, and who knows how we get there. So I think there's a difference in terms of what he said and what they've been arguing in that sense. That Stephen Harper at one point said we were going to have to stop using oil and gas by 2100. So, or the second, I think he said 2100. Or he might have said the second half of the century. So, and that is a fundamental direction that the Liberals are pushing. So I can understand that, and you can argue about the exact wording of everything there. I think it's harder to pin the word lie on that than it is on the Liberals intend to end the use of fossil fuels in 18 months.
No, see, I would disagree with that.
Okay.
And the reason I would is because Trudeau was very clear starting in the 2015 election campaign, and has said this over the years. And Guilbeault was even very clear not that long ago, his comments about the oil sands, which is they have no intent to put in production caps. They're going to let the market determine the production levels of Canadian oil and gas. And I think that the accusation or the allegation that the government intends to phase out, or to dismantle, which is essentially the same thing as phase out in practical terms, that is a deliberate misreading of the statements that have come out from the Trudeau and the various ministers.
Well, this man will suggest a more active taking apart. I would say the Liberals certainly in their policy intend for us to be off oil and gas, and to have the oil and gas sector in Canada be net zero emission by 2050, and to have the rest of the country essentially driving electric vehicles and not using fossil fuels in demand. So, I mean, where that leaves the industry is largely dismantled, but who did the dismantling, I guess, is, to your point, where we can disagree as to the language.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So just to wrap this conversation up, Shawn, are we now at the point where we have to watch the Aaron O'Toole's messages and be a little more critical of them? Because I think that their meme game, I think that the statements that he makes and various of his shadow cabinet make, like Pierre Polve, I think you could make pretty much every day you could accuse somebody of lying. And is it time that we Canadian journalists have to start being a little more firm in this and maybe not skirt it the way we have in the past?
I think that we need to. I think that we need to be very conscious and aggressively reporting on when people falsify information or use false information. Or I would, again, I'd be reluctant to overindulge the word lie, because I think it, as we talked about before, implies a certain intention. But I also think that the Conservatives tend to take from the playbook of the GOP in the States and the Republicans in the States, and there is maybe a more blatant use of misinformation, disinformation there. But I would also say, I mean, the same is true with the Liberals, and we have to, if we're policing the Conservatives, we have to be, just as clear-eyed and vigilant about the Liberals and how they torque the Conservative record and what the Conservatives have to say. So, yeah, I mean, if we're we seem to be moving into an era of politics, not sure we ever left it, but where people are pretty blatant about mischaracterizing, making up, falsifying the record of their opponent. So yes, I think there's a responsibility on part of the media to call that out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, if we see the Liberals, and the same is true if we see any of the provincial governments, John Horgan in BC gets a bit of a pass, I think, very often from provincial and national media on some of his energy comments. And, and of course, we don't talk much about Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, in energy and climate matters. And perhaps we ought to examine their statements a little more closely. But anyway, Shawn, always appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for this.
Markham, thanks very much for having me. See you again.